A very good morning to all of you. I'm so delighted to be here hosting this Unlocking Capital for Sustainability 2023. I see many familiar faces, many new faces, and I'm really excited to be moderating this fireside chat with Desmond Kuek, who's the CEO of Temasek Trust, and our special guest for today.
Thanks, Jessica.
Desmond, I remember at the start of the year, we bumped into each other at Davos. You were 3 weeks into the job at Temasek Trust as CEO.
That's a lifetime ago now.
Yes, and 9 months has transpired.
Yes.
And Temasek Trust has launched so many initiatives. And I wanted to start off by congratulating you on the Philanthropic Asia Summit that happened last week. Incredible amount of collective partnerships that we've seen. And as we've seen from Kate's keynote as well, really amazing things can happen when the public, private, and philanthropic sectors come together. So perhaps I can just start off with you sharing with us some of the initiatives that Temasek Trust has launched recently, and then we can go from there.
Thanks, Jessica, and thank you for inviting me to join you at this event. Great to see so many, and a very good morning to everybody. By way of explaining what it is that we do, because a lot of people still ask me, what is Temasek Trust all about? Maybe I just take a step back and explain that Temasek Trust, is the philanthropic arm of Temasek. And what we see ourselves as having are three roles. One is to be a responsible steward of the philanthropic assets which have been passed over to us from Temasek, as well as third-party donorship and funding and resources that come to us for us to invest and manage. The second key role that we have is to be, I'd say, a trusted advocate for sustainability. And I think this would be something which we all in this room would appreciate the importance of. And the third we see ourselves is to be a proactive catalyst for impact. And I think this is an important thing because as we think about, therefore, if you want to perform all of these three roles well, what really do you want to put your focus and your priority of action towards? And so in Temasek Trust, what we designed and developed were what we call 4 pillars that we thought philanthropic activity would be best placed. And these 4 P's are planet, people, peace, progress. And what's important about this is that, of course, planet we all understand quite intuitively. We need to get into climate action. We need to think about nature and biodiversity and conservation because, the last that I read somewhere was that 2 out of 5 of the species in Asia will be lost by the turn of this century. And all of this has severe impact on lives and livelihoods because of obviously the overlapping boundaries between nature and human beings, and we ought to do something to make things a lot more nature positive. But sustainability, resilience, adaptation, these are all important aspects of the pillar that we call planet. Then there is the pillar of people, where we're thinking, obviously, it's important for us to uplift communities, lives, livelihoods, through better healthcare, more global and public health prevention, prediction. We saw what happened with COVID. And in fact, the last 4 years, I think the statistic also has it, that there are more people in abject, extreme poverty today than there were 4 years ago. And obviously, that effect was sharpened by COVID. We are very interested in maternity and early childhood development because we see that human lives, the potential of this should be best optimized and promoted and enabled by providing right from the first trimester of a pregnant mother the kind of nutrition and education that's needed, and to look at the whole life cycle support and uplifting all the way through to senior citizens, especially as we think about an aging population, and also, if you like, lifespans getting longer, but health spans not necessarily being commensurate with that longer life. Of course, there's the peace pillar where we see globalization, the push towards much stronger sense of competition over scarce resources, geopolitical tensions. All of this leads to a stronger importance and a devotion, shall we say, to promoting a common humanity and peace and harmony in the region. Because, and the fourth pillar being progress, if people are left behind, if there is a widening divide across ethnicity, across geography, across sectors, across wealth, then it does not make for a promising future for all of us. No matter what we want to think about progress in technology, there is no meaningful, sustainable, promising future without progress and peace affecting people and planet. But my last point that I want to make as a way of explaining what it is that we're trying to do is that we don't believe that we obviously can do any of this or all of this on our own. And underpinned by a fifth P is partnership. And this is where that Philanthropy Asia Alliance initiative that you are talking about, where we formally launched this, and we were delighted that when we launched this to say, come and work with us and with everybody else, because the problems are so wicked and so complex and so challenging. We all need to come together, whether it's public sector, private sector, the people sector, and philanthropy. We all need to come together. And if we can come together in an alliance, share resources, knowledge, funding, work together on the ground in the communities with the programs so that we can share lessons so that we're not always running on the same level 101, but we can build lessons from one another so that we can take it to the next higher level of engagement in all of these issues, then we can really try and move the needle impactfully. And we're delighted that in the 1 year that we've been pushing this alliance, we've now got more than 80 members and partners with us. We've managed to receive pledges of more than $1 billion and growing. And even, we launched it, and that's only day one. What do we do with all of this interest, this alignment of desire for action, and what do we do with the funds that we have towards those calls to action so that we can really start moving faster together?
Thank you so much, Desmond. I think that is so encouraging and so inspirational to see that you can collectively bring people together for action, because I think I can speak for many, for those who work in this sector, that it's kind of depressing when you see what's going on in the world, and sometimes it feels like these problems are insurmountable. And you mentioned, that the PAA, this collective, would build capabilities, capacities, and communities in the sector. How do you envision this to be achieved?
So it's true that we've gone past the point of talk, right? It's not we all understand the statistics. We know the climate science. It's really a question of what do you want to do about it? And do you wait for the next person, the next sector? Do you wait for public policy to be ready before you act on private capital? And how do you mobilize people and the philanthropic sector to try and provide some kind of new way of thinking about the collective action that can be brought about? And so our shared purpose is really about building better for every generation. And that's an important aspect, because we're not talking about just today. We're talking about setting the right systems and structures and capacity in place without this sense that the younger generation have of today's generation, that we're abdicating responsibility and accountability for actions and behavior of today and the past. So we've decided that even as we go out to build this alliance and raise the pledges and funding and pull together ideas around climate and health and education, that what we want to do is, because we are possibly in a good position in Temasek Trust for us to help to convene, we thought that we would do one of four enablers. One is we want to build capacity and competency. So sometime in the next few months, we're going to launch a center for what we call an Asian Center for Change Makers. It's a philanthropic institute, in other words, right? It's helping to raise the professionalism, the competency level, bring in much more in terms of talent development, so that there is truly a sector that can be grown to deal with all of these very complex issues. And it's multidisciplinary in nature. You can't imagine that climate, health, and education can be treated as a simple unidimensional activity. And it requires a very strong set of, shall we say, curriculum that brings all of this together. So this is the first thing we'd like to do. The second thing is we all recognize that all of these issues are complex. They're, if you like, they are intersectional, and there are cross effects between climate and health and education and social mobility and politics and economics. How do you treat all of this from a systems point of view? That's important. Systems thinking, a multidisciplinary problem-solving attitude, and I would say action on the ground, lines of activity that we have. How do you self-synchronize, right? As I was saying, you can't wait for somebody to, what's that movie that Michelle Yeoh was in? Everything, everywhere, all at once. It's kind of the idea, right? It's a mad, chaotic set of challenges that we have. But if you wait for it to be stacked up nicely in a nice logical order of, let's wait for the taxonomy, let's wait for the verifications, let's wait for the right tools. If we're waiting, nothing will happen. And so part of that is, if we can build a stronger set of systems thinking, bring the research houses, the data together, I think we can move a lot more coherently. A third thing that we're looking to do is, of course, how do we help the startups with the great ideas from today's, shall we say, impact generation? They're all interested in, how do I make greater impact? But they don't have experience. They don't have funding in a sustained basis. So we've got a third capability that we're trying to encourage, which is an amplifier program that helps to accelerate things that way. And a fourth area that we're hoping to grow by next year, we'd like to have a beta version for this, is to create a marketplace, what I consider an impact marketplace. And you can think of, obviously, a marketplace is where everything comes together in a commerce kind of way. But here it is using impact as the currency that we're talking about. So the best pipelines of ideas from whoever has something that's entrepreneurial, innovative, that needs a platform that can allow this to be socialized so that it can be crowdfunded in a better way in a global marketplace, whether it's individual funders, investors, corporates, institutions. They have an opportunity to see what's in the marketplace. And we hope that this marketplace, we call it COAXIS because it's an acronym for Collaborative Action to Accelerate Impact and Sustainability. So it's COAXIS, and it's a nice idea that it's that double bottom line, right, of profit and purpose coming together in an impactful, meaningful way. And we hope that this is another thing that we can help to do in an action-oriented, practical way, not without challenges, I have to say. So we're starting out, there's nothing in front of us. We're just trying to form the partnerships with anybody who would step on board with us to help us along, whether it's a technology partner or it's a funder or it's a research house or a university globally. And happily, there's a lot of interest in this as well. And we've got a lot of interest from Enterprise Singapore. I think there was mentioned earlier that there is a Temasek Livability Challenge that we're promoting. So there's a whole lot of interest this way, and we're encouraged, excited by the potential that this can bring in an impact marketplace, that one day, who knows, right? One day this might even lead to a trading place, an exchange, in the same way that carbon is becoming an exchangeable commodity, perhaps social impact, biodiversity credits, who knows, right? It's nascent, but it's a way to think about the future, because we all know that the world works in a capitalist way. And the only way you can really truly motivate and accelerate change isn't really entirely from a philanthropic angle. It has to be philanthropy leading the way towards stronger bankability, shall we say, and investability, so that the real money can flow into the change that we need to see.
Very well said, Desmond, and it's super exciting to be hearing about Coaxis and Amplifier and also the Center for Changemakers. It's really interesting because just last week I was on a panel with the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, and they do this survey every year, and they survey ASEAN markets to see climate change attitudes. And one question was, who do you think should be the leader, the country, to lead on climate action? And guess who comes up tops? Singapore. And it's really interesting because some panelists were saying, well, actually it should be the largest country that should be taking the lead. But I think it's because so many institutions in Singapore, and Temasek included, have really kind of come out to convene that we see this leadership, and it's really, really kind of invigorating. And also a word of thanks for the partnership with the Livability Challenge, which we started 6 years ago with Temasek Foundation. And at that time, there was no platform of its kind. It's now grown to become Asia's largest sustainability solutions platform with lots of innovation, startups, and the ecosystem coming together to basically help them to scale, to take the origination stage, which is the most difficult stage, to the next stage. I want to pick up on something that you said about, not waiting for people to be ready. And I want to, kind of draw on the inspiration that is Christina Figueres, who was your keynote speaker last week at the Philanthropic Asia Summit. For those of you who don't know, I'm sure she must be a fixture to all of you. She's the architect behind the Paris Agreement. And I actually interviewed her one-on-one when I was still at the Straits Times many, many years ago. And she's got these piercing blue eyes that look right through you. Super intimidating, but super inspirational. And she actually said, about the COP28 meetings that's coming up, that is kind of a little bit like a circus, and the governments have done their job, right? They've got the Paris Agreement done, and they're passing the baton to the private sector, to the philanthropic sector, to civic society, and to individuals. And you could see that she's getting really impatient, and you've mentioned let's not wait. But what does it take really to kind of accelerate that pace? Because we talk about blended finance, for example, and how we really need it. But when you look at the numbers, it is just a drop in the ocean still. So what do you think are some of the biggest challenges in the region for this?
Well, I think, building on what we've just talked about, not waiting, well, the imperative is quite clear. You can't wait anyway, right? The clock is ticking. And the longer you wait, the worse the problem is. And so somebody just needs to get on with it. And actually, it's not just somebody, but if more somebodies, ideologically, right? This is a philosophical point. If many more somebodies would only take it upon themselves to step forward, eventually we create a critical mass and a tipping point where this becomes the new normal. And sustainability, impact becomes the way of the future that we will see right here and now. So that's kind of like the kind of ideology behind this. And so you were saying that, well, the survey says that Singapore, I hadn't seen that, but it's not unbelievable, it's not incredible. We think of ourselves really as a very small nation, very small in size, but I guess size doesn't matter anymore. Because as they say, we may not all be in the same boat. You've got US, China, huge players in this whole energy space and the carbon emission space. And here we've got one tiny red dot here in Southeast Asia. But the reality, which I guess we all recognize, is that we may not all be in the same boat. Some are archipelagic states, and some are small island states, and some are continents, and some are mountainous countries. We may not all be in the same boat, but as they say, we're all in the same storm. And whatever it is that we're faced with requires a multinational, multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary approach to address those issues. And maybe in some ways it is an ability for us to convene, to bring together like-minded players into a fairly, shall we say, a less harmful or more innocuous environment, such as we have here in Singapore, where the hubbing facilities are there that allows for conversations and collaboration to take place. And I'm encouraged, I have to say. I think you're talking about Christina Figueres. I think we're encouraged. I'm seeing it, right? And I think when we first met, even before Davos, when I was in the Ministry for the Environment and Water Resources, 15 years ago now, the conversations were different. The narrative was very different. It was not easy to get anybody to understand sustainability and why it is it should be uppermost on anybody's agenda. In fact, most people consider sustainability to be a cost. You only do it if you had to. That was only 10, 15 years ago. If you were trying to get anybody to talk to you about putting in place a sustainable program, people were talking about it less from the benefit and the opportunity, more from just doing the barest minimum to get away with what's needed. But the conversation has shifted completely today. People today are not looking at this as a zero-sum game between profitability and sustainability. In fact, the more progressive-minded businesses today and governments today are recognizing that if you are not going to play into the sustainability agenda, you're not going to be economically viable in the future. Because the whole world, the technologies, the interests by the entrepreneurs, the innovators are all going ESG. And you're going to be stranded, left behind with archaic technologies and businesses where one day you will wake up and the consumer has changed his or her mind and figured that you're no longer it. And so I would say that I'm encouraged that this is the momentum. And in fact, I would say that the space that I'm in with philanthropy, we're also recognizing that philanthropy isn't any longer a checkbook charity kind of thing where it's it's kind of like give and forget, or fire and forget in some of the military parlance that I'm used to, right? People are looking at systemic, structural change, impact, or what it is that's material, additional, intentional, so that the money that they're putting into philanthropy can be, in its own sense, with a small s, sustainable. And all our ideas around climate or health or education that we're trying to uplift communities, those ideas can only be sustained if you can find an investable or a monetizable or bankable angle to it to keep it going for the long run. And that's the way I think we should be thinking about the future.
Thank you. I think that's spot on, because really you talked about the capitalist way, and really if you have the right market incentives, that would really then trigger the outcomes that we need as a society. I want to pick up on what you said about US and China. And obviously geopolitics has been a big issue on the international agenda this year. I had been at the ASEAN meetings in Jakarta just 2 weeks ago, and it was top of the agenda of ASEAN centrality. But there was also this discomfort that with an ongoing war and with very volatile energy prices and commodity prices, it's kind of difficult to navigate where the investment should go, where you should hedge. Should you be more be slower? Should you accelerate? And I wonder, what is your take on the geopolitics of this world and its impact on accelerating finance for sustainable development?
I think it's really unfortunate, of course. The war in Europe, the challenges with the US and China, very unfortunate state of affairs. I would say, of course, if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, and of course, this whole question of energy transition took a bit of a beating as a result of that Russian invasion into Ukraine. And suddenly there's a flight to safety and security for energy. It's not unexpected, I would say, that this would be the way in which governments think about ensuring that there is sufficient energy supply to their own local population. So there was a flight back to safe energy security, so to speak. But even as we say that, I think from a short-term point of view, we saw that flight. But the governments in Europe, and in fact everywhere in the world, woke up to the reality that you can't now put all your bets on oil and gas and the traditional fossil fuels that's coming out of a few primary sources of energy in the world today. Because you've put all your eggs in that basket, the Ukraine war suggested that it makes for smart politics, smart economics, to diversify. And diversify to what? You obviously move towards renewables. And so whether the motivation was sustainability or the motivation was security, actually the end, in my mind, the medium to long-term game is you need to move towards renewables. And that's a happy situation in that sense from the rest of us who feel that this is an important agenda to drive forward. So I see that there is a lot more energy, there's a lot more interest in working that energy transition towards renewables. Now, US and China is a different thing, of course, from what's happening in Ukraine. But even in the dangers and the risks, and we all understand what those might be, and that whole bifurcation that could happen with all of this, and the difficulties that would be created for Asia if both sides went into some kind of conflict out at sea or in the air, and particularly over the situation in Taiwan. I think that's a different subject for a fireside, right? But I want to say that even in that, there are new sustainability opportunities. Even as the US and China go to our loggerheads, the Chinese are pushing very, very clearly towards a whole lot more self-sustainability and a lot more clean technologies, and you see this happening. You see also a stronger interest now in developing the Southeast Asian spaces, the markets, the capabilities here, because obviously Southeast Asia, ASEAN, presents itself as a viable geopolitical zone, if you like, to diversify supply chains, manufacturing lines, the clean areas of work. And it's interesting to note that Indonesia and Philippines hold huge geothermal possibilities. Vietnam is one of the biggest solar module makers. Laos has got huge potential in hydro. And so if we think about all this, even in the backdrop of difficult geopolitics, I think we can put renewed vigor to developing fresh opportunities that will take sustainability forward in our part of the world.
That's very inspiring. Thank you for that. I have got Desmond's permission to take one question from all of you here. So if there is a question, now is your time. Maybe I'm putting them on the spot. I will perhaps ask a question and then maybe come back to the audience. Really about the energy transition. You had mentioned it a lot, in your last comments. And one of the sad things that we've seen is that in the US, the political agenda has been hijacked, by some factions, and actually in the UK as well, for this whole concept of the disruption leading to the loss of livelihoods and jobs, and therefore it is not equitable and it's not just. And this whole idea of leaving no one behind is complicated by the fact that this transition is going to cause massive, upheaval in society. What do you say to the critics, I suppose, who use that as an excuse for inaction?
I guess you used the right word. It is an excuse, right? I think people need to think about it in terms of short term versus longer term. So yes, I think the energy transition, and as the whole world migrates to a new economy, frankly, not just with energy, but in many, many other sectors where digital and sustainable becomes at the forefront of what we should be driving the new economy towards, I think obviously, as it has been, as we move from an agricultural age to an industrial age to an information age, there will be huge upheavals in the ways that skills, livelihoods, competencies need to be developed and upskilled or reskilled and retrained. Now, this is not new, right? We've had to deal with this with civilization and societies all through our human history. So I don't see that there is any particular difficulty that human ingenuity and care cannot resolve. If we took a systemic approach and a responsible attitude that this is the future. It may be a 5-year, it may be a 20-year future, it may be a 2300 future, but this is the inexorable push towards this direction. And as you say, it's an excuse to abdicate or to shirk away a clear responsibility by all parties to say, let's deal with this. And so in Asia, obviously, as we think about this, as is with America and as is with every other economy, we quite simply just have to think about how do you plot this out? How do you plan a multi-year transition into a new technology, a new industry, a new future? It is better than waking up one day and finding that you've been left stranded and you're not ready because all your workers were ill-prepared, not resilient, because we just put our head in the sand and refuse to acknowledge that this is the future that could be just tomorrow. Now, of course, a just and equitable transition has got all kinds of other financial implications, which provide people with all kinds of reasons why it's not in their interest to move now, because the finances just don't work out, the economics don't play out quite so well. And yes, it is a reason for people to hold back out of either corporate interests or national interests. And this has been pretty much the difficulty that climate talks have had over all these years, right, between developed and developing countries, and how it is that we all need to think about the sustainability versus the economic continuation of the business. Which is the reason perhaps why a lot of the new finance innovations that we're all thinking about, the catalytic way in which capital can be applied, can help in some of these transition conversations. And so we know, of course, that philanthropy, government grants, is not going to solve the climate problem. And I think we heard from Kate the kind of size, the magnitude of the climate problem. Trillions of dollars to solve this. There's no way that you can get that trillions of dollars from philanthropy alone. And there's no way that you can get to that answer from investments today, because simply some of these ideas are too nascent for the risk thresholds to be met, and so therefore money, the big investable money, is not going in that way. So natural capital, inclusive growth, net zero, these are difficult bankability topics. So how do you solve this, I suppose, is what we're all trying to grapple with, is there a way now to think across those boundaries? Can we bring public sector government grants in at first loss? Can we bring philanthropy in with a lens that doing good and maybe getting some tax incentive for that will help to unlock some of this capital, so that the risk, the aggregated risk for that is lowered, so that then the big investable boys will be prepared to put that trillions of dollars and shape the investment climate that way, because it's only then that you truly move the needle towards all the issues of sustainability that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. And I really like your point about personal conviction, because I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to what we believe, what our personal values are, and how we see our role in this collective problem that we have. Just coming to my last question to wrap up the panel, I'm going to give one more opportunity to anyone who might have a burning question. No? Okay, well, I will be selfish and take all the questions. And really my last question, Desmond, it's been a fascinating chat, is what is your ask of businesses in the region today, in the context of all the partnerships that you've been, talking about that we really need? And what are your hopes of government from the upcoming COP28 meeting?
Well, of businesses, I think if businesses can think about sustainability and profitability, like I was saying earlier, in the same breath, it's not a zero-sum game anymore. In fact, you need them both. It's not an or function, right? It's either or, it's an and function. Profitability, business bottom lines need to be done in tandem with a purpose-driven and impactful agenda. In fact, most businesses today, I would say, are thinking along the lines of establishing a clear purpose statement. I have yet to see a purpose statement by any business that has a dollar sign in that purpose statement, right? And everybody talks about loftier goals in what they might be able to bring about, because this is the way their staff, their employees are motivated today. No longer entirely by a profit bottom line. So I hope, therefore, that businesses can can take this as a serious call to impact and to their commitments towards the scope 1, 2, and 3 goals towards net zero. For COP22, 28, yes. For COP28, yes, it's just, well, COP28, I think there is a new initiative in COP28 because typically COP has been a policy shop, right? There's a lot of government people, policymakers that come together to try and forge together some kind of action. This year, I know that there is a new initiative that is in the blue zone in COP28 that has business and philanthropy right up front and center as a plenary event. And I'm hopeful. The president of this is Badia Jaffa from the Middle East, from UAE. And he's been speaking to me about what can we do together to try and move this agenda along. And I'd like to say that, again, I'm optimistic. I am positive that there is a growing momentum that we all do recognize that businesses, philanthropy, not just governments alone, everybody needs to come together in a collective effort, in a collaborative way to bring about the change that we want to see.
Thank you, Desmond. That's super inspiring note to end this fireside chat. And if I could just take away the two things, that the baton has been passed on to us and there is no time to waste. So please join me to thank Desmond for a really solid conversation that will set us off to the next segment. Thank you so much, Desmond. Thank you.